Hi there, good evening, and you're watching a special weekend bulletin with me, Cheryl D'Souza. And the first day of the G20 Summit in the capital saw many important decisions being taken, from the adoption of the new Delhi Leadership Declaration to the induction of the African Union as the permanent member of the Group of 20. And today, which was the day 2 of the G20 Summit, we've also seen an equally spectacular moment. You had a marking of the ceremonial transfer of the G20 presidency. You have Prime Minister Narendra Modi today handing over the gavel to Brazilian President, who praised India for giving voice to the topics of interest of emerging economies. Let's try and sum up India's watershed moment through the course of this bulletin. First, let's hear out what Prime Minister Narendra Modi had to say.
One Earth, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर का रोड मैप सुखद हो। स्वस्ति अस्तु विश्वस्य, यानी संपूर्ण विश्व में आशा और शांति का संचार हो। 140 करोड़ भारतीयों की इसी मंगल कामना के साथ आप सभी का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
All right, and ET now caught up exclusively with the DEA Secretary Ajay Seth to understand the key outcomes of the summit. Let's hear out what exactly he had to say.
So when you ask that consensus has been reached on a number of issues, that's the outcome. And be it for strengthening multilateral banks or finding a policy framework for assessing risk about crypto assets, or the building blocks for regulating them, as well as a roadmap of implementing those regulations. Third element has been that how digital public infrastructure can play a very strong role on financial inclusion as well as on productivity gains in the private sector. If I have to list three, these will be the three most prominent ones, but there are a number of others ones. If you can just add one or two more in this particular one, that under the Indian presidency, instead of speaking for infrastructure, talking about infrastructure in general, we brought in a very people-centric theme of sustainable financing cities of tomorrow. And it's not just in developing countries, but even in advanced economies, where the cities have to become a much more energy efficient, what it means for them, what kind of changes it would be required, how to do the financing, what are the policy prescriptions. Those have been agreed. MDBs have been asked that in their work, including in their financing, they should factor those things. So that will be the fourth element where there has been a strong work. Fifth word to put in is to bring a very balanced discourse on climate financing and on sustainable development goal financing. These will be, if I have to list 4 or 5, the most prominent one, and as Honorable Finance Minister had spoken yesterday, there's a long list.
So on the issue of crypto, so where do we stand and what's the roadmap there? And in India, as far as RBI is concerned, it has proposed a ban. On that issue, domestic regulations, how free are we, and what has happened on crypto?
We are discussing today is what has happened in, or what are the achievements in the G20 Summit, which has just got closed today. And a consensus on assessment on the policy prescriptions on handling crypto assets and the regulations. Based on the consensus which India has succeeded to build there, now we'll have to assess those recommendations, see those recommendations vis-a-vis our own economy, and then take a considered view.
And to this, to Indian economy, sir, any other issue that has emerged so far as we are connected to the global economy? And do we need to worry about anything in all those meetings? Any of these sort of concerns have come up?
So there's a huge set of responsibility, and as we say that the presidency is till 30th November, so we still have a lot of work to do. And finance track meetings are there. In this month, there are a number of meetings. Then next month is the ministerial meeting is coming up. So we have a lot of work to do. Until then, G20 process will be on, and beyond that, then we'll have to take forward and be an active participants on the issues which concerns us and issues which concerns Global South.
All right, let's now head across straight to the location where we saw the historic G20 Summit take place. My colleagues Sumit Chaturvedi, as well as I have Sumita Karir, who's joining me on this leg of the show. And yes, it's been an exciting 2 days, isn't it?
In fact, absolutely, yes, Cheryl. It's been an exciting 2 days. I think a first for me to cover such a global summit right here in India. So that's really, really unparalleled, the overall experience today. In fact, started with a rainy day. There was slight rain in the morning. But yes, after 2 days of, unparalleled talks and, decisions and outcomes, today was no less as, we showed to our viewers about, the Prime Minister actually addressing that very, very important summit once again and reinforcing the idea of one Earth, one family, one future. He then passed on the baton of G20's presidency next year to be organized by the Brazilian President Lula da Silva, who also, resonated some of the views that India holds. He stated, and I quote, "We're not only interested in a divided G20, only with a joint action we can face challenges of our days." We're going to be talking more about this and a whole host of other issues that came up. But first things first, we're now joined by a guest, a very special guest, in fact, who's joining us right now, Mr. Sumant Sinha, who's the founder and chairman and CEO of Renew. Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha, for joining us this afternoon as India wraps up day 2 of the Leaders Summit, G20 Leaders Summit here in New Delhi. You take us through what have been, your biggest highlights. We've seen a whole host of, announcements coming from G20, a whole host of, sort of pacts being signed and, of course, a joint declaration. But what's been that one shining moment for you as far as the G20 Summit is concerned?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on a little bit of a rainy Sunday afternoon. I think for me, the biggest takeaway from the G20 was, in some ways, the sense that India has moved into the center stage of global geopolitics. And the fact that India was playing such a major role in putting together such a path-breaking declaration, the Delhi Declaration, getting so many different countries across the table, overcoming their issues and so on, and to get such a fairly significant declaration passed, which is so wide-ranging, covers so many different areas, I think is really quite remarkable. I think it speaks to the personal leadership of the Prime Minister, and I think all the entire team that has worked with him to help him in this effort. And I think going forward, India will be seen as a much stronger voice in multilateral conversations going forward. So for me, in some ways, that was the biggest win as an Indian citizen.
Mr. Sinha, a lot has happened over the last 2 days, including today as well. One of the big outcomes has been the Biofuel Alliance. India has proposed 20% mixing of ethanol in petroleum products. So coming from a power sector, power background, how do you particularly see this Biofuel Alliance, what overall it will entail for India, for the world economy as well?
Yeah, I think let's take a step back. I think on climate change as a whole, a lot of progress was made at this G20 summit. First of all, we got the world to the G20 to reaffirm the target of 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is a sort of a shrinking window, but still achievable if the world really puts its head down and moves towards it. As you know, G20 countries represent almost 80% of carbon emissions. So it's really important what this group really tries to do and think. So that is one very important. The second very important was that the G20 also reaffirmed that the world should get to net zero by 2050, which means that if some countries like India and China get there in 2060 and 2070, that means other countries will have to get there earlier for us to get the globe as a whole to get to net zero by 2050. That's a very, very important step forward. And I'm just hoping that a lot of these targets will be taken forward at COP28 that is going to be held in the next couple of months in Dubai. So it's really created a very strong platform for that. The third very important thing was the fact that there was this consensus that the green hydrogen area really needs to be moved forward much faster. And for that, there were a number of things that have been spelled out, including, for example, agreeing to the definition of green hydrogen, getting a green hydrogen innovation center set up under the ISA, the International Solar Alliance in India. So India is really positioning itself very strongly to take a lead in green hydrogen, which is going to be very, very important. And then, of course, the point that you made, which is around the Global Biofuels Alliance, which, as you know, can be a very important way for us to bring down the consumption of fossil fuels. And India, along with Brazil, is one of the biggest consumers and developers of biofuels. So I think India has the technology. We can become leaders in this area. And if that means that we can allow, bring down our consumption of fossil fuels, that of course would be a big win for India. And the last thing I would say in this whole issue is financing for climate change. I think that's an important area. And there were two particular things that came up in that. Number one, the long, pending demand of $100 billion of financing every year from the developed world to the developing world. That demand was again put forward, and the developed world said that they will go forward with that. And even more important was the whole issue of really reforming the multilateral development banks, which should have a very central role to play in climate change and climate financing, but unfortunately have not really been able to do so as a result of their mandates and as a result of how they are structured and configured and so on. And so I think there is a collective now realization that the MDBs have to play a very significant role, a much more enlarged role in doing this. And given the fact that the G20 countries are the major stakeholders and shareholders in the MDBs, hopefully this gives the mandate to the MDBs to reform themselves and really start bringing much higher amounts of financing, catalyzing more private financing into the space. So I think that's the other thing. And the last thing in a way was, the Prime Minister has been coming out with this call for life, which has been lifestyle for the environment. And I think that is something that has in fact been endorsed at the G20 as well, where they've called it lifestyle for sustainable development. And I think along with that, there is a recognition that energy efficiency is as important. So there's a effort that is now going to hopefully get started on improving energy efficiency. And then, of course, as you know, there was a call also to triple the amount of installed renewable energy capacity globally by 2030, which is very important to get us to the 2050 net zero target. And so if you look at the whole series of announcements around climate change, it's actually extremely far-ranging and wide-ranging. And I must say kudos to India for having really stepped into providing leadership to the world as a whole on climate change issues.
Right. So, Mr. Sinha, you've spoken about a whole host of issues that were discussed, and rightly so. In fact, this arena of climate change only encompasses so many, other issues. But coming back to the biofuels allowance, I want your word on the fact that India is looking to. This is coming in at a time when India is looking to sort of cut its import dependence on oil too much, too much due to OPEC plus and grouping, which all of these nations are really enforcing production cuts. I want to understand the kind of impact on prices, in the near future that this signing of this biofuel alliance will have on the prices of fuel.
Yeah, that's very hard to say.
Or on
Sumita,
companies, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit hard to say. I think, right now the Indian government has set a target of getting to 20% blending of ethanol as quickly as possible. We already are producing 550 crore liters of ethanol. And by all appearances, we can actually increase that substantially. And if we do that, of course, as a country, we will reduce our import dependence on oil substantially. But whether that actually has an impact on global oil prices, which are driven by so many other factors, that's harder to say because, it's not just a demand issue, it's also a supply issue. And very often, as you know, the OPEC countries modulate their supplies to ensure that prices stay high. And so, of course, the best solution for all of us is if we can continue through biofuels to decrease our dependence on fossil fuels. That is step one. Number two, also through green hydrogen and green hydrogen derivatives, we can get more and more into fuel cells, which can power mass transit and shipping and aviation. That will also bring down the demand for fossil fuels. And then, of course, I think we have to look at the whole issue of electric vehicles, which also needs to be expanded dramatically. So I think we have to work on all of these strategies, and I'm pretty confident that we will. Right. The Prime Minister set a target that by 2047, we have to become energy independent. And I think the technologies are now becoming visible for us to do that. And I think the whole biofuel space is going to be an important sort of actor in getting us to that point.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Sinha, for sharing your thoughts with us. Well, a lot of things are happening, not just one thing, Biofuel Alliance, but we have seen what has happened on, including African Union here, including having a proper new infrastructure plan. On this, we are joined by our two more guests, Mr. Jayant Dasgupta, he's former ambassador and representative of India to WTO, and also Sanjay Kumar, partner at Deloitte. I'll begin with Mr. Dasgupta. Mr. Dasgupta, well, a lot has been happening. Today is the last day. We can say that, 2-day summit. But what, as per you, has been the main achievement of India? And if I ask you, if you have to put 1, 2, 3 on this, what will be the first, second, and third achievements of India? Can you just briefly tell us about that?
It's difficult to summarize it in 3 points, but I'll try. There are 83 paragraphs in the declaration, as everybody knows. The first thing about India, from an India perspective, is that India has seized the initiative to be the voice of the global South by including the African Union as a member of the G20, which has now become G21 effectively. The second point is that India has succeeded in getting the rest of the G20 members to focus attention on the twin challenges of climate change and poverty alleviation. Because unless there is sustainable development in the poorer countries, this challenge of climate change will not be possible to be addressed fully. And the third aspect is about how to finance, amongst other things, climate change mitigation and adaptation funding. Now, for that, it is important to reform the multilateral development bank. And there has been, by and large, consensus on reforming it. And if the new capital adequacy norms are adopted, which have come out of this report by Mr. N.K. Singh and Larry Summers, the first part of the report, $200 billion of additional funding would be available for financing. So these are the three major issues, but there are other equally important issues which I am not mentioning.
Right. Mr. Kumar, now I'd like to come to you and perhaps talk about one of the most significant outcomes of this G20 summit. There have been many significant outcomes, and my colleague Cheryl in the studio just a little while back summed up all of them for you. But coming specifically to the India, Middle East and Europe rail link, which is going to set up a whole lot of, collaboration and cooperation in the areas of energy, ports, perhaps data as well, according to reports. And this was actually reinforced. The support to India and, perhaps the United States, and of course this entire project was reinforced by the Italian Premier. And according to agencies, Italy plans to withdraw from the Chinese President Xi Jinping's signature Belt and Road Initiative while still trying to maintain friendly relations. Now, one would assume that, this is to sort of counter the new announcement that was made yesterday, is to counter China's BRI plan. What is your take on that, on perhaps how this is a significant diplomatic win for India as well?
Thanks for having me here. This is, of course, a very important, announcement which has come on the sidelines of G20 Summit. Infrastructure and digital infrastructure also are very important for the development. And through this initiative, they're trying to bring India closer to Middle East, which is already there physically, and then connect it with Europe. And India sees itself to be an important partner in that, which is going to be from the point of view of not only the developing the infrastructure, but also creating jobs for many of its people, because India, of course, in the last few years had seen a kind of surge in capital investment, particularly on the road and ports, and that will come quite handy. So, and has gathered some amount of experience in managing such projects. So those things will also come to the fore. This another point which I would want to mention here is that the Middle East already has a large number of Indian workers and diaspora, and they would be quite benefiting from this because they would also be involved in the work that that would entail out of this kind of connectivity. And overall, I would say that this is bringing economic, connectivity and creating kind of corridor between India, Middle East, and Europe. And you said it that it is trying to wean away some of these partners, and particularly Middle East, which had gone on to the BRI to some extent, and this will wean away from them, from that influence, and bring together a different equation altogether. So it is a political move. It's a move on the basis of creating economic, connect, and it will benefit all the three parts of the world: one continent, Europe, India, and Middle East.
And we'll all have to wait and watch how these incredible commitments that were made on paper, how they translate into concrete action on the ground and lead to actionable change that is felt by one and all, by the North and the South, East and the West.
On that one thing also, Sumita, we are going to have a G20 virtual summit once again in November, and it's going to continue as we are from, we are reporting from here. More things will happen over the next few months, and we'll keep on.
And we'll have to wait and watch for that on what that virtual summit really entails. As after this, India will be passing on the baton to India has already passed on the baton to Brazil for next year's presidency. But Cheryl, back to the studio. It's incredible moment for India. This presidency, this declaration really comes in at a time when the world is looking at India as a fast-growing economy, especially when China's economy is slowing down. So hectic developments these past 2 days. It's been an honor and, of course, a privilege for both of us from ET Now to be covering the G20 Summit here in New Delhi.
Absolutely hectic 2 days, but yes, it's been a fruitful one, at least for the nation, and G20 Summit coming to an end today. Thank you so much, Sumit, as well as Sumita, for that. And with that, we are totally out of time on this edition. Thank you so much for watching.